In the gathering storm of the late 1930s, the world's navies were locked in a frantic race, a desperate scramble to build bigger, faster, and more powerful warships. Treaties that had once limited the size of these steel leviathans were now little more than ink on paper, and the design boards of America, Britain, Japan, and Germany were filled with the blueprints of titans. It was in this crucible of impending conflict that a new breed of American battleship was conceived. They needed to be compact, heavily armored, and armed with the most powerful guns the nation could field. They were the South Dakota class, and among them was a vessel that would earn a reputation for toughness, for luck, and for a fighting spirit that would see her through the worst of World War II without losing a single soul in combat. Her name was the USS Massachusetts, but to the thousands of men who served on her, she was, and always would be, Big Mamie. This is the story of a battleship forged in the heart of New England, a warship that fired some of the first and the very last heavy shells of the American war effort, a veteran of duels with enemy battleships, island bombardments, and terrifying typhoons. It's the story of how she was saved from the scrapyard by the very people she was built to protect, becoming a permanent monument to a generation that answered the call. Part 1. Forged in Steel, a New Class of Power. The South Dakota-class battleships were an engineering marvel, born from necessity. The preceding North Carolina class were the first new American battleships built in nearly 2 decades, but naval architects knew they could do better. The challenge was constraint. While the Second London Naval Treaty was all but defunct, its ghost still lingered in the design requirements, pushing for a standard displacement of 35,000 long tons. To create a superior warship within that limit, the designers had to get creative. The solution was a shorter, more compact hull. By reducing the length by nearly 50 feet, 15 meters, compared to the North Carolinas, engineers could concentrate the ship's armor over its most vital areas, creating a veritable citadel, protecting the engines, magazines, and command centers. This design philosophy resulted in one of the most heavily protected battleships ever built. The main armor belt was an incredible 12.2 inches, 310 millimeters, thick, but it was also inclined at 19 degrees. This angling dramatically increased its effective thickness against incoming shells, meaning an enemy projectile would have to penetrate far more steel than a simple measurement would suggest. Internally, the ship was a labyrinth of watertight compartments, designed to contain flooding and damage. This all-or-nothing armor scheme meant that some parts of the ship were left relatively unprotected, but the core, the heart and mind of the vessel, was encased in a nearly impenetrable shell. On July 20, 1939, her keel was laid down at the Fall River shipyard in Quincy, Massachusetts. As the massive steel components began to take shape, the world outside was descending into chaos. By the time she was launched on September 23, 1941, Germany had conquered France and was deep into its invasion of the Soviet Union. The Battle of Britain had been won by a thread, and Japan was aggressively expanding its empire in Asia. The United States was still officially neutral, but the air was thick with tension. Then, just over 2 months after the Massachusetts slid into the Fall River, the attack on Pearl Harbor thrust America into the war. The urgency to complete the new battleship intensified tenfold. Workers swarmed over her hull, fitting the machinery, wiring the complex electrical systems, and installing her fearsome main armament. The primary weapons were 9 massive 16-inch 45-caliber Mark VI guns, housed in 3 armored turrets. These guns could hurl a 2,700-pound, 1,225-kilogram, armor-piercing shell over 20 miles, 32 kilometers, with terrifying accuracy. For defense against closer threats, she carried a formidable secondary battery of 25-inch, 38-caliber dual-purpose guns. These were brilliant weapons, capable of engaging both surface targets and enemy aircraft with equal lethality. firing proximity-fused shells that would detonate when they got close to an aircraft, filling the sky with a deadly cloud of shrapnel. As the war progressed, her anti-aircraft capabilities were relentlessly upgraded, eventually bristling with dozens of 40mm Bofors cannons and 20mm Oerlikon guns, creating a dome of flak that would make any enemy pilot think twice. On May 12, 1942, less than 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the USS Massachusetts was commissioned into the United States Navy, with Captain Francis E. M. Whiting in command. The shakedown cruise, a period of intense training and testing, revealed a sturdy and reliable ship. Her crew, a mix of seasoned sailors and young recruits fresh from civilian life, began to learn the intricate dance of operating a 45,000-ton war machine. It was during this time that she earned her enduring nickname. While the exact origin is debated, the most popular story is that the crew, noting her hull number 59, started calling her Big Mamie, after a popular song of the era by the Andrews Sisters, quote, "Roll Out the Barrel," which featured a line about Big Mamie. The name stuck. It was affectionate, a touch of home for a ship that was about to sail into the uncertain waters of a global war. Her first mission would not be a gentle introduction. It would be a trial by fire against a proud and determined foe. Part 2. Trial by Fire. The Naval Battle of Casablanca. In the autumn of 1942, the war had reached a critical turning point. The Allies, determined to open a second front to relieve pressure on the Soviet Union and begin the liberation of Europe, planned a massive amphibious invasion of North Africa. Codenamed Operation Torch, it was a complex and daring gamble. One of the key objectives was the port city of Casablanca in French Morocco. The problem was the political allegiance of the forces stationed there. Morocco was controlled by Vichy France, the puppet government established after Germany's victory in 1940. While officially neutral, the Vichy regime was collaborationist, and its military forces were a volatile and unpredictable element. Allied command hoped the French would not resist, but they had to plan as if they would. To protect the invasion fleet and provide heavy fire support, the United States Navy assembled Task Force 34, a powerful armada centered around a brand-new battleship Massachusetts, the older battleship Texas, the aircraft carrier Ranger, and a host of cruisers and destroyers. As the fleet approached the Moroccan coast on the night of November 7, the mood was tense. Diplomatic efforts to secure a peaceful landing had failed. The local French commander, Admiral François Michelier, had declared he would resist any invasion force. Anchored in Casablanca harbor, protected by formidable coastal defense batteries, was a significant portion of the French Atlantic Fleet. It included a light cruiser, several destroyers, and submarines. But the crown jewel, and the biggest threat, was the battleship Jean Bart. A sister ship to the legendary Richelieu, the Jean Bart was one of the most powerful warships in the world. However, she was not quite finished. When France fell in 1944, she had made a dramatic escape from the shipyard, sailing for Casablanca, with only one of her 2 quadruple 15-inch gun turrets operational. She was immobile, a fledgling fortress, but a fortress whose guns could wreak havoc on the American transports anchored just offshore. At dawn on November 8, 1942, American troops began hitting the beaches. The response from the French was immediate and hostile. Shore batteries opened fire on the landing craft, and the ships in the harbor began to raise steam. Aboard the Massachusetts, the order was given. This was the moment she was built for. Her main objective was to neutralize the Jean Bart and the powerful coastal battery known as El Hank. At 07:04 a.m., from a range of over 24,000 yards, 22,000 meters, the 9 16-inch guns of Big Mamie roared to life, firing the first heavy-caliber American shells of World War II in the European and African theater. The first salvo was a near miss, but the spotter planes circling overhead quickly corrected the aim. What followed was one of the most unique duels in naval history. The Massachusetts, maneuvering freely out at sea, systematically pounded the stationary French battleship. The Jean Bart, despite being incomplete, fought back with surprising ferocity. Her 4 operational 15-inch guns fired salvos that straddled the American battleship, sending huge geysers of water erupting into the air around her. The men on Big Mamie's bridge could see the flash of the enemy guns, and then had to endure the agonizingly long seconds until the shells landed, their shrieking passage overhead a terrifying sound. But the American gunnery was relentless and devastatingly accurate. A 16-inch armor-piercing shell, weighing more than a small car, slammed into the Jean Bart, penetrating the deck and detonating deep within her hull. Another hit jammed the rotating mechanism of her 1 operational turret, silencing her main guns. In total, the Massachusetts fired 9 full salvos and scored at least 5 direct hits, leaving the French battleship a burning, crippled wreck. With the Jean Bart out of action, Big Mamie and the cruiser Tuscaloosa turned their attention to the El Hank battery, whose 4 8-inch guns were still firing on the fleet. Their combined fire soon silenced the fortification. Meanwhile, French destroyers and a cruiser sortied from the harbor in a brave but suicidal charge against the vastly superior American force. The Massachusetts, along with cruisers Wichita and Tuscaloosa, and a screen of destroyers, met them head-on. The French ships were outgunned and overwhelmed. One of Big Mamie's 16-inch shells hit the destroyer Fouguet, which exploded and sank almost immediately. Another destroyer, the Milan, was heavily damaged and beached. By the end of the day, the French naval forces in Casablanca were shattered. The USS Massachusetts had been in her first battle, a chaotic and brutal engagement against a determined enemy, and had emerged completely unscathed. She had proven the effectiveness of her design and the skill of her crew, but her war was just beginning. Her next assignment would take her halfway around the world, to a new theater and a new kind of warfare. Part 3. The Pacific Campaign, Island Hopping and Carrier Guard. After proving her mettle in the Atlantic, the USS Massachusetts underwent a refit, and in early 1943, she sailed for the Pacific. Here, the nature of the war was different. The vast distances of the Pacific Ocean made aircraft carriers the undisputed queens of the sea. The primary role for battleships like Big Mamie was no longer to seek out and destroy enemy battleships in grand fleet actions, but to act as colossal bodyguards for the carriers. They formed a floating shield, a steel ring around the vital flak tops that were projecting American air power across the ocean. This role was critically important. A single enemy bomb or torpedo could cripple a carrier, taking it out of the fight for months. The Massachusetts, with her dozens of anti-aircraft guns and sophisticated radar-directed fire control, was a formidable deterrent. She joined the legendary Task Force 58, the main strike force of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, and began the long, bloody slog across the Central Pacific. Her life became a cycle of intense action, followed by periods of tense waiting. The crew would spend weeks at sea, escorting the carriers as they launched strikes against Japanese-held islands. Then would come the invasions, and Big Mamie's role would shift to shore bombardment. Her 16-inch guns, which had dueled with the Jean Bart, were now turned against enemy fortifications, bunkers, and troop concentration on islands, with names that would become legendary in the annals of warfare: the Gilbert and Marshall Islands, Tarawa, Kwajalein. In February 1944, she was part of the massive carrier raid on the Japanese naval stronghold of Truk Atoll, a place often called the spatial Gibraltar of the Pacific. The strikes devastated the base, sinking dozens of ships and destroying hundreds of aircraft. Throughout these operations, the Massachusetts provided a constant, watchful presence, her anti-aircraft crews spending countless hours scanning the skies for the telltale glint of an incoming enemy plane. They engaged kamikazes, torpedo bombers, and dive bombers, filling the air with a storm of steel and helping to keep the heart of the fleet, the carriers, safe. Life aboard the ship was a world unto itself. With a crew of over 2,300 men, the Massachusetts was a floating city. The sheer logistics of feeding, housing and supplying that many men in the middle of an ocean were staggering. Fresh water was rationed, and the meals, while plentiful, could become monotonous. The heat in the Pacific was relentless, especially deep within the ship in the engine and fire rooms, where temperatures could soar. Boredom was a constant enemy, broken by the sudden, adrenaline-fueled chaos of a call to general quarters. Yet, a powerful sense of camaraderie developed. The men, from all corners of America, were bound together by their shared experience, their reliance on one another, and their service to a common cause. The island-hopping campaign continued relentlessly. The Massachusetts supported operations in the Palau Islands and participated in the Battle of the Philippine Sea, also known as the Fox, Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, where American naval aviators decimated the Japanese carrier air groups. Later, she would lend her firepower to some of the most brutal campaigns of the war. During the invasion of Iwo Jima, her guns pounded the slopes of Mount Suribachi. During the battle for Okinawa, she navigated the treacherous waters known as Kamikaze Alley, defending the fleet against waves of desperate suicide attacks. Through it all, Big Mamie seemed to lead a charmed life. While other ships were hit, damaged, and even sunk, she steamed on, earning a reputation as a lucky ship. But the final months of the war would bring her to the doorstep of the enemy and pit her against one of nature's most destructive forces. Part 4. The Final Salvo and a Mighty Storm. By the summer of 1945, the Japanese Empire was collapsing. American forces had clawed their way across the Pacific and were now operating with impunity off the coast of Japan itself. The USS Massachusetts was part of Task Force 38, which roamed the Japanese coastline, launching airstrikes and conducting bombardments against the war-weary nation's industrial heartland. For the crew of Big Mamie, it was a surreal experience. After years of fighting on distant islands, they could now see the shores of their enemy on the horizon. In mid-July, the Massachusetts, along with the battleships Indiana and South Dakota, was detached to bombard the city of Kamaishi on the island of Honshu. Kamaishi was home to a major iron and steel works, a vital cog in Japan's war machine. Steaming to within 10 miles, 16 kilometers of the coast, the battleships opened fire. For hours, they systematically pulverized the industrial complex with their 16-inch guns. The destruction was immense. A few weeks later, they repeated the performance, this time at Hamamatsu, another industrial center. These bombardments were designed not just to destroy military targets, but to demoralize the Japanese leadership and demonstrate that the Allies could strike wherever they pleased. On August 9, 1945, while preparing for another bombardment mission, the Massachusetts crew received word of the atomic bombing of Nagasaki. That same day, she fired her 16-inch guns at a factory in Hamamatsu. As the massive shells arched towards their target, no one aboard could have known the historical significance of that moment. It would later be determined that this was the very last 16-inch projectile fired in combat during World War II. It was a fitting bookend for a ship that had fired some of the first American heavy shells of the conflict nearly 3 years earlier in the Atlantic. A few days later, Japan surrendered. But Big Mamie's wartime service had one last terrifying chapter. While the guns had fallen silent, the Pacific Ocean had not. In December 1944, months before the end of the war, the fleet had encountered a different kind of enemy, one against which its armor and guns offered no protection, a catastrophic storm known as Typhoon Cobra. The fleet, then under the command of Admiral William Bull Halsey, sailed directly into the path of the storm. The winds rose to over 140 miles per hour, 225 kilometers per hour, and the waves swelled into monstrous mountains of water, some estimated to be over 70 feet, 21 meters high. For the smaller ships, like the destroyers, it was a fight for survival. 3 of them, the USS Spence, Hull, and Monaghan, were overwhelmed. They capsized and sank, taking with them nearly 800 sailors. Even for a mighty battleship like the Massachusetts, the storm was a terrifying ordeal. The 45,000-ton vessel was tossed about like a toy. She rolled heavily, at times reaching angles that put her decks under water and threatened to capsize her. Below decks, men and equipment were thrown about violently, but her robust construction and the skillful seamanship of her crew saw her through. She weathered the storm, battered but intact, a testament to the strength that had been built into her at the Fall River shipyard. The encounter with Typhoon Cobra was a stark reminder that even in the midst of a human conflict, the power of nature remained the ultimate, untamable force. With the war over, the Massachusetts supported the initial occupation of Japan before finally heading for home. Her wartime journey was complete. She had earned 11 battle stars for her service, steamed hundreds of thousands of miles, and fired thousands of shells. Most remarkably, she had done it all without a single member of her crew being killed in combat, a record that defied the odds and cemented her legacy as a truly blessed ship. Part 5. A New Mission, From Warship to Museum. The end of World War II brought a wave of relief and celebration across the United States. But for the vast armada of warships that had secured the victory, it marked the beginning of an uncertain peace. The USS Massachusetts, a veteran of 2 oceans and countless campaigns, was no exception. After a final overhaul, she was decommissioned on March 27, 1947, and assigned to the Atlantic Reserve Fleet at Norfolk, Virginia. For 15 years, the once mighty battleship sat silent and dormant, a ghost of her former self, tied up alongside other mothballed giants of the war. By the early 1960s, the era of the battleship was well and truly over. Missiles and nuclear submarines had rendered their big guns obsolete. The Navy, needing to trim its budget and clear out aging vessels, began to sell off its surplus warships for scrap. On June 8, 1962, the name USS Massachusetts was struck from the Naval Vessel Register, and she was officially slated to be sold for her weight in steel. The news was a blow to the thousands of men who had served aboard her. To them, she wasn't just a piece of obsolete hardware. She was a repository of memories, a symbol of their youth, their sacrifice, and their victory. The idea of Big Mamie being torn apart by cutting torches was unthinkable. A group of her former crewmen, her plank owners, decided to fight back. They formed the USS Massachusetts Memorial Committee, with an audacious goal: to save their ship and bring her home to Massachusetts as a permanent museum and memorial.
It was a monumental undertaking.
The Navy was willing to donate the ship, but the committee would have to raise the funds necessary to tow her to Massachusetts and prepare a permanent berth. The estimated cost was nearly $500,000, a huge sum at the time. The campaign that followed was a remarkable display of grassroots dedication. Veterans held fundraisers, wrote letters, and gave speeches, sharing the story of their beloved ship with anyone who would listen. The cause captured the imagination of the people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The effort transcended generations. While veterans gave what they could, it was the children of Massachusetts who became some of the campaign's most enthusiastic fundraisers. Across the state, school children donated their pennies, nickels, and dimes, their lunch money, to help save Big Mamie. It was a powerful testament to the ship's connection to her namesake state. Slowly but surely, the money came in. Corporations, civic groups, and ordinary citizens all contributed. The campaign was a success. The committee raised the necessary funds, and the Navy officially transferred ownership of the battleship. In the summer of 1965, the U.S. Massachusetts was towed from Virginia to Fall River, Massachusetts. A spot had been prepared for her along the waterfront, a place that would soon be known as Battleship Cove. On August 14, 1965, almost 20 years to the day after the end of World War II, Big Mamie was opened to the public. She was officially enshrined as a memorial not just to her own crew, but to all Massachusetts residents who gave their lives in service to their country during the war. She became a national historic landmark, the centerpiece of what would grow into the world's largest collection of historic naval ships. Today, she rests peacefully in the waters of Mount Hope Bay, her guns silent, her engines cold. But she is far from a dead ship. She is a classroom, a memorial, and a tangible link to the past. Millions of visitors have walked her decks, marveling at the scale of her guns, squeezing through the narrow passageways, and trying to imagine what it must have been like to live and fight on this steel giant. She stands as a proud monument to the ingenuity of her designers, the skill of the workers who built her, and most of all, the courage and dedication of the young men who sailed her into history. The USS Massachusetts survived enemy shells, kamikazes, and monstrous typhoons. But her greatest victory was arguably the one she won in peacetime, a victory over the scrapyard, ensuring that the story of Big Mamie, the unscarred veteran of World War II, would never be forgotten. The effort to save the USS Massachusetts is a powerful reminder that history is something we have to actively preserve. These incredible machines, and the stories of those who served on them, can easily be lost to time and the scrap heap if people don't step up to protect them. In turn, the sky was involved. Are there other preserved warships or military vehicles that you believe have an incredible story that deserves to be told? Let us know in the comments below, because your missionary things help us decide what piece of history to investigate next. And if you enjoyed this journey into the life of Big Mamie and want to ensure you catch our next deep dive into military history, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Hitting that button is the best way to help us continue bringing these amazing stories to light. Thank you for watching.